Good afternoon, everyone. I've been in the club almost 5 years now, and when I first came in, I was also part of the Leadership Columbia class of 2010. A great program to offer the opportunity to get to know the community, various leaders and aspects of the greater Columbia area. And our class project that we decided on was to renovate one of the cottages or dorms, if you will, at the Epworth Children's Home in downtown Columbia. And that afforded me and our classmates the opportunity to do what we thought were some just really great things for these kids who come from broken homes, from families who are just having a hard time in life at that particular point in their lives. And I learned that Epworth provides residential care counseling for kids from the ages of 4 to 18. And I've just learned through my friend here, Mr. Andrew Boozer, that they also have certain care, residential care for parents as well, specifically young mothers who are having problems with drugs and so forth. They have their children there with them. So they've been doing this now for a couple of years. Actually, since 1896, Epworth Children's Home has been doing these things and many others in the greater Columbia area. So I wanted to invite Andrew, who is the recent since 2015, the Vice President of Development and Communications for the Children's Home. The last couple of years, we have provided a grant to Epworth. So again, I can't say enough about the good work that they do and the success rate from these kids going from Epworth in that environment on to other things in college and so forth. If you get on their website, you can't help but be just infused with, there's some really good things going on in this community, and to a large part, Spring Valley Rotary has something to do with that. So this is a good example of that, in my opinion. So without further ado from me, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Andrew Boozer. If you give him a warm Spring Valley welcome.
Everybody at Epworth, I just want to take a minute and say thank you for having me here to talk a little bit about what happens there on Millwood, that we all drive by and may not always know what happens on that block there. But also on behalf of the children that live in Epworth every day, that are separated from their families and have had really a traumatic childhood. Their next step in life, the reason that their cycle will be broken is because people like you and like me create places like Epworth and created an environment that can change their lives. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I want to tell you a quick story about a little girl named Heather. You may not know, but for the last 4 or 5 years, Coach Spurrier and the Gamecock football team have invited all the children over at Epworth over to the stadium for Thanksgiving dinner. They all go into Williams Bryce and they sit down and have a big turkey dinner with all the fixings. The kids and the players and the coaches all get to know each other. They can play around the stadium and have a good time. Well, Heather has been at Epworth for a few years, and Heather knew that this was coming and she was excited. And the morning of Thanksgiving, she gets on the bus and somebody noticed that she had a brand new ball cap, Gamecock ball cap in her hand, which is unusual because Heather, very bright young lady, she's in middle school, might be in 9th grade now, maybe in high school. Very bright, but is into the arts, loves music, loves to draw and to paint, reads a lot. Gamecock football has just never really been on her radar screen that we knew about. Well, Heather got on the bus and they went and they had a nice dinner, and all the kids were having so much fun, and they're out on the field playing after dinner and having a good game of touch football with all the Gamecock football team, having fun. But Heather wasn't playing football. Heather had her baseball cap and she was going around and quietly asking players and coaches to sign that hat for her. And she did that, and she never put the hat on. She got back on the bus when everything was done and came back to Epworth. Nobody really saw anything about that baseball cap again. Nobody thought about asking her what happened to it, and it was forgotten. Until the day before Christmas Eve, when Mr. Tom Parker, who's the activities director, who helps set up things for the kids to do around town, was walking through the Publix there on Rosewood and heard, "Hey, Mr. Parker." It was a teacher from the local school. Said, "Hey, did you know Heather was going to do that?" Mr. Parker had no idea, didn't even know anything. "Well, I don't know what you're saying." And the teacher looked and said, "Heather came up to me on the last day of school and gave me a present. She gave me a cap that had been signed by the entire Gamecock football team and coaching staff. And it was addressed with my name on it. She got that for me, and it moved me." And it moved everybody at Epworth, because in a season when so many children are greedy, and what am I going to get me? What am I going to get for me for Christmas? Heather was looking out for the people that were lifting her up. She had saved up her money that she had earned by going to tutoring sessions and taking care of her chores at Epworth, her allowance. And because she had gotten good grades on her report card, was very thankful that her teacher was helping her and wanted to give that teacher something for Christmas. And knew that he loved Gamecock football and that she was going to have the opportunity to have a special gift for him. And so when she, in the middle of all the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, Heather took a minute to give back. We're all so proud of her and what she did, and she's a fine example of what we strive for with the children at Epworth. That no matter what their history is, no matter where they're coming from, they're going to learn life skills, and that it's not all about you, and it's not all about your terrible past, but it's about giving back and setting a goal higher for the future. And we've been at this, as she said, for a long time. Since 1896, Epworth's been right here downtown Columbia on Millwood, except back then it wasn't downtown Columbia, it was the outskirts. It was a dairy farm. It was the Epworth Orphanage. It was founded by a few Methodist ministers. And the boys woke up and they would go out and milk the cows and gather the eggs while the girls fixed breakfast. They came back, they had breakfast together, went to school, got out of school, worked the farm, gathered the crops, took it to the dinner, to the mess hall to be fixed for dinner, eat dinner, start again. And while we may not have that same farm environment at Epworth, we do still try to teach those lessons that the farm ingrained in those children many years ago. That a work ethic means something. That there's skills that you can learn now, no matter your age, that they're going to serve you for the rest of your life. And so for Epworth, we take pride in that. And so if that's a summer job, or that's just doing chores around campus, if that's raking some leaves every once in a while, if it's giving back by going to work at a soup kitchen, all of those things that we can do, we try to instill that in the children still. Last year we served over 180 children. That's 180 children that are school age, that are coming from broken homes, broken family systems. They'll be at Epworth for an average of a year and a half. Some are there for a few weeks, some are there for an entire childhood. But they're coming from a situation where adults haven't done good things to them. They haven't provided, they haven't taken care of, they haven't had the luxury that so many of us had growing up of having a loving home environment. And when they come to Epworth, they've been through a lot of trauma. And it's our goal to just embrace them with love and comprehensive care so that they don't have to have the past to find their future. We do that in a few different ways. First, we make sure they're taken care of medically and physically. For a lot of our children, they've never seen a doctor. They've certainly never seen an eye doctor or a dentist. And so when we can provide those things, within 24 hours, they get a full medical examination. The doctor's appointments are immediately set, so they are taken care of physically. A few years ago, we had a young man come to Epworth, and his leg had been broken 4 times. He'd never received treatment. He required surgery. That was significant physical neglect in his young childhood. So we provide them with that. We provide them with the tools they need to heal physically. But there's also a lot of emotional scars, things that we don't see on the surface. And so we provide those children with social workers, with people who love them, both in the cottage and in counseling sessions, so that they have the emotional support that they need. And as those things start to take care of, and they start to feel safe, and they're taken care of, and they have plenty to eat of good, nutritious food, and they have the medical care they need, they're enrolled in a public school where they have friends and they have a normal childhood, we provide them with that academic support they need to succeed. Most of our children are 3 grade levels behind when they come to our doors. As a 4th grader who can't read. And when you think about those children coming in our front door who've had terrible things happen at home, if they've been going to school at all, have had really bad school experiences, we've got to meet them where they are and move the ball forward, and that's what we do. Last year, by the end of the year, 60% of our children were on the honor roll. And for 3 straight years, 100% of our kids have graduated high school and gone on to higher education. So these children who are coming in as a 4th grader who can't read are now going on to college and doing great things with the rest of their lives. So for some children, yes, they're going on to college. But as I mentioned earlier briefly, a lot of our children are only with us for a short period of time. 1.5 years is an average stay. And we get a lot of questions, where do those children go? Well, while they may come from a broken home, we do everything we can to make sure they have a family environment where they are able to keep those connections with local family members. And so the most common place for a child to go is back home with a relative. It may not be mom, but it might be grandma. It may not be dad, but it may be grandpa. It may be an uncle or an older sibling. And so for a lot of our children, they're going back home with relatives. And so while they're at Epworth, we're going to make sure they have the care they need, but they also keep that family dynamic, the most healthy dynamic they could possibly have. And we offer family therapy so that family can all come together and work through the issues that led to the child being placed at Epworth. And some of our children are adopted, and so when they're here for a few years, usually the younger children may be adopted into the community. It's not something Epworth handles directly, but usually 3 or 4 children a year will be adopted, and we get that question a lot. But for the children who are at Epworth when they turn 18, when the foster care system says you're an adult, congratulations, where do they go? Well, at Epworth, we don't turn our back on these children, but we have a program called our Independent Living Program where those 18-year-olds who have finished high school are encouraged to move on to college or to higher education. So as long as they're going into education, continue their education, whether that's a 4-year, 2-year, or just a job training school, any of those things, they will be an Epworth child, and they will be surrounded with the same support system they had through high school. We've got apartments set up for those young adults so that they can still call Epworth home. We were full over Christmas break with college students who came from all over the state back home to have Christmas with Epworth. And one of those girls was Jasmine. I happen to have her picture here. She's the one on my right. Jasmine came to Epworth when she was 11 years old. She remembers moving 13 times in those first 11 years. 13 homes. She was the youngest of 3. And just before their last move, her older sister ran away. She found out a few years later that her older sister, shortly after that, was pregnant at a very young age. She's still struggling to take care of that child. Her brother, who was just a few years older than her, when they were placed in their first foster home facility, when they were taken away from their mother, ran away and joined a gang. And today he's serving a life sentence for murder. When he ran away from foster home, Jasmine came to Epworth to get her in a new environment. She was 11 years old. Epworth became her home. And for the next 7 years, she excelled at school, had friends, did lots of fun things. Last year, she graduated with honors from Drew High School, was accepted into Lander University on a full academic scholarship, and is today in class to be a registered nurse. Now, if we look at that family as one example, what's the difference between the sister, the brother, and Jasmine? You've got a child that had a young girl who had a child at a very young age. A boy who joined a gang is now in jail for murder. And you've got Jasmine, who's in college on a full scholarship to be a nurse. That's the difference Epworth makes, and that's the difference that this community makes by giving and volunteering and making a place like Epworth vibrant. So I thank you for what you've done the last few years as a Rotary Club. There's so many church groups and churches and schools in our area who support with supplies, with volunteer hours, with monetary donations to make all this possible. And what we're all doing is we're advancing the cause of children. And when we turn on the nightly news and we see another tragic story, which is happening all too often in this state for the last few years, I want you to know that there's at least one spot where there's some happy endings happening. And that Epworth is there for those children. And when you hear these terrible stories, some of those children come to Epworth's door the next day, and that we're putting these plans into motion to make every child's story as happy as they can be so that their past does not define their future. I got a phone call just Friday from a gentleman. He's about 60 years old. He lives in Conway, born right outside of Gilbert. He said, Andrew, I want to tell you something. I was at a funeral for one of your alums, and while I was standing in line, I met another man who grew up at Epworth. He's now 80 years old. And he started talking about how much he enjoyed Epworth back in those days. And I looked at him and said, I know exactly what you're talking about because I went there too. He was a resident in the 1960s. He had never told his family, he's now married, has children, grandchild on the way. He had never told his wife or anybody in his family that he had come to Epworth and that he had grown up there. He said, I just keep thinking back to everything that place has done for me. And since I graduated from Epworth, I joined the military, I graduated school, I owned my business, I made millions of dollars. I became a lawyer, I have a child who's a dentist, I have a child who's a PhD. None of that would have happened if Epworth wouldn't have helped my mother out in the 1960s. If I said thank you a million times to you right now, Andrew, it wouldn't be enough. That touched my heart. That's the difference. In 60 years from now, who's going to call and say thank you for what's happening right now in Epworth? It's heartwarming to think about that idea. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for not just for the children that are here now, but for what's going to happen 60, 70, 200 years down the road that Epworth is doing today. So thank you so much for having me. I look forward to meeting you some after the program. Got time for questions?
Well, what is your population currently and what is your capacity?
Sure. Right now we're at about 74 children living in the cottages. 80 is full and 85 is capacity. So that gives you an idea. We've got 9 cottages set up with about 8 to 10 children, depending on the age breakdown in each cottage. That's our capacity. Now that does not include our college students. We have 9 in college now. We're expecting that number to double next year because we have a large senior class this year. So we're expecting that number to double in the next year.
How do the kids enter the system, so to speak?
Sure. Most of our children are placed by the Department of Social Services in our care. So they're taken out of their home for a number of reasons and placed into our care at that point. That may be a referral from school, from a police officer, it could be from a number of different places. About 80% of our children at any given time have been placed by the Department of Social Services. The other 20% have either been placed by the family directly, they recognize that they need help, or a church group or a community group suggest that Epworth come in and help that child out while things get squared away at home. So.
I think anybody who could take a child in 18 months and take them 3 grades behind and get them up would be a model who would be turning to. So what's the system that takes a child from 1st to 4th grade in that short period? And not only that, gets them to honor roll.
Sure. So what we do is assessment when a child comes in academically. We have a vice president for academics who is in the elementary, middle, and high school daily to work with teachers, principals, and school counselors and social workers to make sure the child is in the right area. So if the child needs to be self-contained for a while, if they need to start taking some different steps, if there needs to be an IEP so that they can get the help they need for a learning disability or some special circumstances, that those are done. For many of our children, that step has never been taken. That very basic step for most children. For our children, that has not been taken. So that starts the process. Now, as that happens, our children have, on campus, we have our Barnes Learning Center, which has a fully stocked library, a computer lab, and classrooms. And we bring certified teachers in to tutor those children in the after-school hours. And every child has their tutoring schedule. So in addition to going to school, they come home, they have a snack, they play a little bit. Then they have their tutoring session with a certified teacher who can give them the one-on-one attention or the small group attention, depending on the child's needs. And then also in the cottages, the adults that are living there in the cottage with the child will help them with homework, will help them study for tests and do those things that are needed. So we do everything we can. We put a huge priority on academics because we know even with a child that's only going to be here for a year and a half or 2 years, this is the window of opportunity that we can change the trajectory of this child's life, no matter what age they are. And they have the opportunity to transform the rest of their lives, that they know how to study, that they know what homework means, that they can feel good about going to school, which is not usually something our children feel when they come into our doors.
That's fabulous. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
fabulous.
We're very proud of the success the kids are doing in school.
You sent out a mailer that had a young boy on, and I think the letter said that his wish was to be with his sisters.
Yes.
I don't remember the name, but that piece touched me. I mean, it really touched me. And the only reason you hadn't seen me yet is because I just went through knee replacement. I think I met you at the golf.
We played a little golf a few months ago.
Yeah, but I'm still coming.
Well, that's good. Yes, absolutely. Over half of our children have a sibling at Epworth. Usually, those children are placed all at one time together. There was one particular instance over the summer where we were not able to accept all the children at one time. So the brother and sister came, but the other brother was placed somewhere else. And so through the summer months, we increased communication between that sibling group. They were able to call and write and email and have visits on the weekends together. But the one brother that was by himself really wanted to be at Epworth. And so when we were finally had an opening and were able to take him in October, we sat down with every child beginning in October to start getting Christmas wishes and ideas for the community to buy gifts for the children. We asked him, what do you want for Christmas? And he says, I don't need anything. I'm getting what I want by being around my brother and my sister. Now, the funny side story of that is the older brother didn't want anything to do with it.
You had said that many of the children want to stay for a year and a half. Do you have any children that stay for a year and a half and then leave and then come back? Or, just sometimes when they return to family situations, if the family hasn't really changed, then even if the child takes great strides, falls apart again.
Sure. So the question is, when a child goes home with a relative, do we get those children back? And the answer is yes. And when that happens, which is not often, but it does happen, it's usually a public placement. The child is being placed there by the Department of Social Services, and over the next year and a half or 2 years, as the court systems find a safe place for that child, they go back home. And so the public placement is over at that point. DSS begins to slowly step aside. And that family member realized that it's more than they can handle. And so they call Epworth back. And now that child is placed in that other 20%, where that family is reaching out for help as a private placement. Just if I were to drop my boys off there in the morning, that would be the same situation. So we do see that, and that's part of where 80% of our children are coming through the Department of Social Services system, and that other 20% picks up cases such as that.
Can you discuss your staffing and what the staff to resident ratio?
Sure. So we have, as I said, we've got about 74 up to 85 children living in the cottages. And we have some other programs like the college students and like the program with the mothers that are dealing with addiction issues, and so those are separate populations there. But for those 80 children, we've got about 100 employees that are taking care of those children. Now, some of those are not full-time employees, some of those are the staff that come in on the weekend, but in every cottage, we have 4 to 6 adults that are taking care of that cottage for the week. That's the cottage team, and there's 2 adults in each cottage of those 9 cottages at all times. And so we have a social worker type position. We have what I call the cottage mom, the cottage coordinator, who's keeping everybody's schedule up, including the schedule of the primary caretakers, which would be usually college students or recent graduates that are looking to get into the social work field, or somebody who has a heart to work on the children. And they stay in the cottage overnight. Nobody lives in the cottage with them, but the staff are on duty for, say, 3 days, 2 nights, and then they're off duty while another shift comes on for the rest of the week. So we have a huge number of employees that are taking care of these children, in addition to a campus pastor, a dining hall staff, the academic staff. We have tutors that will come in. It's not included in that 100 number. A recreation staff, fundraising and development as well.
How is it that you're not full to capacity?
Sure. So there's an ebb and flow to our population, and usually when school is in session is when we are the busiest, when our population is the highest. There's a number of different reasons for that, but one of the primary reasons is that school teachers are often the first to notice something isn't right at home. And so once school comes in session, somebody says, something isn't right about what happened over break. And the Department of Social Services steps in, and you go about a month later, and that's when our population starts to increase. So all through the fall semester, coming out of summer, and really for most of the summer, we were very close to capacity. We were at 80 or above all summer and into the fall. Then at Christmas, more family members are saying, you know what, I can take care of little Johnny. He can come live with me. And so the closer you get to Christmas, the more children go home or go to a relative or are adopted. They find a place around those holidays. And then the Department of Social Services and other agencies are less likely to place a child in our care during the holidays. It usually takes an extreme circumstance for a child to be removed as you get closer to Christmas. And so we have a dip, and we're sort of in the middle of that dip now, but by the time spring rolls along, we'll be back.
You know, right now you're funding and where funding comes from.
Sure, so the question's about funding and where Epworth's funding comes from. We have 3 primary sources of funding. The first is private donations. That's from businesses, from private individuals, from church groups, and those things. That's $2.3 million that needs to be raised every year right there. We have a small stipend that comes from those public placements through the Department of Social Services, so that's a daily fixed number that they're contracted for every night that a child stays, you get X number of dollars. In the Epworth model, that dollar provides most of Monday's expenses and a little bit of Tuesday's expenses, but by like Tuesday when school lets out, we're done. So we do have a little government funding that comes in, and then we have an endowment, which was, Epworth used to be 300 acres, as Shandon got bigger, it's 32 acres, so we still have a very large campus, but we transferred that into endowment, so we do have invested funds, so we have income that comes from those, and we work really hard with businesses and with individuals for planning gifts, for leaving Epworth in their estate plans, and we take all of those monies, and rather than spending them on an annual budget, we invest those into our endowments, and we can take that money forward essentially forever and work off the income from that endowment. And that's our 3 primary sources. It all comes together about $4 million.
So you're running pretty much in the black.
Yes, we've been running the black for a few years now. In 2008 happened and everything got turned upside down. It was a couple years there, but we're back on firm footing and running in the black, and have had for the last 5 years the private donation part has been the fastest growing. It's really been the Columbia community coming together and doing a great job.
Do you reach out to your alumni to give?
We do work with our alumni to give, and our alumni run the gamut from, like I said, I just learned we had a millionaire alum on Friday who had never talked about his experience at Epworth. I might head to Conway soon and have lunch with him. So it runs that gamut all the way to somebody who just struggled at college and never got firm footing. So we run the gamut, but there's an Epworth Alumni Association, and they get together and have meetings. They just met last Sunday afternoon on the Epworth campus, and they plan their fundraising activities for the year. They're actually fundraising for Epworth and giving back. They do that primarily through a barbecue that they have, that they just set the date for, April 11th, hot off the presses, just got on the website today. Saturday, April the 11th, they're on Millwood. They'll come in. Anybody wants to volunteer to cook barbecue all night on Friday night, they're on Millwood and have a good time and smoke up the Shandon neighborhood and make everything smell good. And then on Saturday morning, they'll come out and they'll sell by the plate or whole Boston butts and have a band out there. The Model A Club comes and lines up their old classic cars, and we really have a lot of fun with that event. And that event raises $20,000 to $25,000 a year from that group. And it's something for those alums to be together and reunite over that weekend, and then to, at the end of the week, present that check back to Epworth. Really is special for them and special for us.
Any other questions?